In the heart of Africa, in a small village surrounded by golden savannas and towering baobab trees, a girl named Zuberi was born. The night was calm, the stars blinking like curious eyes as her first cries filled the air. Her mother held her close, love shining in her tired eyes. But as the midwife lifted the baby for the villagers to see, a ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Zuberi's head was larger than any newborn they had ever seen. At first, the villagers exchanged uncertain glances, their faces a mix of surprise and discomfort. Then came the murmurs, soft but sharp. "Have you ever seen a head like that?" one woman whispered. "Maybe she carries too many thoughts." An old man chuckled. The children were less subtle. As Zuberi grew, they made a game out of pointing and laughing whenever she passed. Some ran ahead of her, making exaggerated bobbing motions, pretending their heads were too heavy to carry. Others called her names, cruel words that stung like thorny vines wrapping around her heart. But Zuberi never fought back. She never shouted or cried where they could see. Instead, she watched, she listened, and she learned. While the other children spent their days playing, she sat with the elders, absorbing their stories, their wisdom, their knowledge of the land. She watched the way the river never questioned its course, the way the strongest trees bent with the wind instead of breaking. She knew she was different, but she also knew that being different wasn't always a curse. Kamari was the kind of boy everyone admired. He was fast, strong, and always at the center of attention. Wherever he went, laughter followed, sometimes because of his charm, but more often because of his sharp tongue. He had a way of turning words into weapons, and his favorite target was Zuberi. From the moment they were old enough to play together, Kamari made sure everyone saw Zuberi as nothing more than a joke. He gave her cruel nicknames, twisting them into rhymes that the other children eagerly repeated. Whenever she walked past, he would pretend to struggle under an imaginary weight, clutching his head dramatically and stumbling as if his own skull had suddenly grown too heavy. The children roared with laughter, their voices echoing through the village like a cruel song that never ended. It wasn't just words. Kamari found ways to humiliate her every single day. If she sat on a rock, he'd tell everyone it was about to break under her giant brain. If she answered a question correctly in front of the elders, he'd scoff. Of course she knows. Her head is big enough to hold an entire library. Even when she was silent, he found a way to make her the center of ridicule. Some of the other children hesitated, unsure if it was right to laugh at her. But Kamari was the leader, the boy everyone wanted to impress. If he laughed, they laughed. If he pointed, they pointed. And so, Zuberi became the village's favorite joke, not because she had done anything wrong, but because Kamari had decided that she should be. But no matter how many times they mocked her, no matter how loud their laughter became, Zuberi never lashed out. She never tried to fight him. She never begged him to stop. She simply looked at him with those deep, knowing eyes, the kind of eyes that saw more than people wanted to show. And though Kamari would never admit it, there was something about that look that unsettled him, even as he continued to make her life miserable. No matter how much Kamari mocked her, no matter how many times the children laughed behind her back, Zuberi never broke. She never shouted, never cried in front of them, never let them see the pain they caused. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her large eyes observing everything, her mind absorbing more than anyone realized. While the other children spent their afternoons chasing each other through the fields or playing by the river, Zuberi sat with the elders. She listened to their stories, the ones that others found too long or too boring. She paid attention to the lessons hidden within them, the warnings about the changing seasons, the secrets of the land, the wisdom passed down from generations before. The elders noticed her curiosity, the way she never interrupted, never dismissed their words as mere tales. Slowly, they began to share more with her, trusting her with knowledge they had once thought only the oldest should know. She learned to read the sky, to tell when a storm was coming before the first cloud appeared. She learned the songs of birds, their calls revealing where water could be found, where danger might lurk. She understood the way plants spoke, how their leaves whispered hints about sickness and health. Where others saw an ordinary forest, Zuberi saw a world filled with answers, waiting to be understood, and despite everything she remained kind. When a boy who had once laughed at her fell and scraped his knee, she was the first to offer help. When a girl who had mocked her got lost in the woods, it was Zuberi who calmly guided her back home. Even Kamari, in his worst moments, never managed to break the kindness within her. She did not fight his cruelty with more cruelty. She did not lower herself to his level. She simply waited. She waited for the moment when the world would prove what she already knew, that wisdom, patience, and kindness were far stronger than mockery could ever be. It started with a cough, small, harmless, nothing to worry about, but then it spread. One by one, villagers began to fall sick. First, the elders felt it, their bodies growing weak, their voices fading to whispers. Then the children stopped playing, too tired to run, their eyes dull with fever. Even the strongest hunters, the men who once roamed the land with pride, now struggled to stand. Something was wrong. Something terrible had come to their village. At first, the healers weren't worried. They mixed herbs, brewed potions, whispered prayers over the sick, but nothing worked. The fever only worsened. The people stopped eating, stopped speaking, their breaths shallow, their skin burning hot. The healers searched desperately for answers, but no matter what they tried, the illness refused to leave. The village, once filled with the sounds of laughter and life, grew silent. Fear crept in like a shadow. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers to the ancestors. Fathers gathered in hushed circles, their faces filled with worry. What if the sickness never left? What if this was a curse? Some blamed the river, claiming its waters had turned against them. Others whispered of angry spirits, punishing them for past mistakes. And then there were those who looked for someone to blame, someone different, someone easy to point at. Eyes turned towards Zuberi. She had always been different, always stood apart. Some whispered that her large head held secrets no one should know. Others said she must have angered the spirits, that her strange wisdom had brought this upon them. She could feel their stares, their growing suspicion, but she did not flinch. She had seen fear before. She knew what it did to people. As the sickness spread, so did the panic. The village was running out of time. If a cure wasn't found soon, they would lose everything. As fear gripped the village, Zuberi watched in silence. She saw the way the strongest warriors struggled to lift their own arms, the way the children's laughter had disappeared, replaced by weak, painful coughs. The sickness was spreading fast, and the healers had no answers. Desperation filled the air like a thick, suffocating fog. And then she spoke. Her voice was steady, calm, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "I know a cure," she said. The villagers turned to her, eyes filled with shock, disbelief, even anger. Zuberi, the girl they mocked, the one they never took seriously. How could she possibly know something the great healers did not? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some scoffed, shaking their heads. What does she know? Someone muttered. She thinks her big head makes her smarter than the elders. Another sneered. Even the healers, the ones who had failed to find a cure, looked at her with suspicion. But Zuberi did not flinch. She stood tall, her dark eyes filled with certainty. "There is a plant," she said, her voice unwavering. "Deep in the forest, beyond the river. My grandmother spoke of it when I was a child. She said it holds the power to bring back strength, to cool the fever, to heal what nothing else can." More whispers, more doubt. The villagers had always seen Zuberi as strange, different, and now, when the village was at its weakest, she was claiming to have the answer. Kamari stepped forward, his usual smirk absent. Even he looked uncertain. "And why should we believe you?" he asked, arms crossed. "Why should we trust you now?" Zuberi met his gaze without fear. "Because you have no choice," she said simply. "Your people are dying. You can doubt me. You can laugh at me like you always have. Or you can let me help." A heavy silence fell over the village. No one spoke. No one moved. The air was thick with hesitation, with pride, with the fear of being wrong. But in the end, it was not pride that mattered. It was survival. Slowly, hesitantly, the villagers began to listen. Kamari had always been the loudest voice against Zuberi. He had led the laughter, thrown the sharpest words. made sure everyone knew she was different. But now, none of that mattered. His younger brother lay in their small hut, barely breathing. His skin burned with fever, his lips cracked and dry. The boy who used to run after Kamari, always smiling, always looking up to him, was now too weak to lift his own hand. Kamari sat beside him, feeling helpless. The great warriors of the village had fallen, the elders had no answers, and the healers' mixtures had failed. His mother wept quietly, pressing a damp cloth to his brother's forehead, whispering desperate prayers. Kamari wanted to tell her it would be okay, that his brother would wake up, but he couldn't, because he wasn't sure if he would. And then, through the open doorway, he saw her, Zuberi, standing at the edge of the village, watching. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something steady, something certain. He hated that certainty. He hated that she still stood strong while the rest of them were breaking, but he had no choice. Swallowing his pride felt like swallowing fire, but Kamari forced himself to stand. His legs felt weak as he walked toward her, each step heavier than the last. The villagers watched, whispering, surprised to see him approach the girl he had tormented for so long. But Kamari didn't care about their whispers. He only cared about his brother. He stopped in front of Zuberi, his hands clenched into fists. His voice, usually full of arrogance, was now quiet, almost shaking. "You said you know a cure," he muttered, not looking her in the eyes. Zuberi didn't answer right away. She studied him, as if waiting to see if he was truly ready to listen. Then, finally, she spoke. "I do." Kamari's jaw tightened. He had spent years making fun of her. He had humiliated her in front of the whole village, and now he had to ask for her help. The weight of his own actions pressed down on him like a stone, but his brother's shallow breathing echoed in his mind. He took a deep breath and forced the words out. "Please." It was barely more than a whisper, but it was enough. For the first time, Zuberi saw something different in his eyes. Not arrogance, not cruelty, just desperation. And that was enough for her. Without another word, she turned toward the forest. "Come," she said. "We don't have much time." And just like that, the boy who had always mocked her was now following in her footsteps, putting his faith in the very girl he had once called useless. The forest was silent except for the sound of their footsteps. The thick trees blocked most of the sunlight, casting long shadows on the ground. Zuberi led the way, moving with confidence. She knew this land well, unlike the others who hesitated with every step. Kamari followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the darkness. He had always acted fearless, but now fear gripped him. They walked for hours, deeper into the unknown. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and old leaves. Strange noises echoed around them, animals moving, unseen eyes watching. Every snap of a branch made someone flinch. But Zuberi kept going. She knew they had to reach the healing plant before it was too late. Then, they reached their first challenge. A river cut through their path, its waters rushing violently over jagged rocks. The only way across was a narrow bridge made of old wood and vines. It looked weak, barely able to hold one person at a time. Zuberi stepped forward, testing the planks carefully. They creaked, but held. One by one, the others followed. Kamari was the last to cross. The moment he stepped onto the bridge, a loud crack echoed through the air. He froze. The wood beneath his foot split slightly, but Zuberi stretched out her hand. "Don't stop. Keep moving." He listened, his breath shaky as he stepped forward. Finally, he reached the other side, and the bridge remained intact. They continued their journey, but the forest grew darker. Thick vines covered the path ahead, their thorns sharp. The warriors tried cutting through them, but the vines were strong. Zuberi stepped closer, studying them. Instead of forcing their way through, she led them around, finding a hidden path that avoided the thorn. The deeper they went, the more dangers appeared. A growl from the shadows made them stop. Two glowing eyes stared at them from the darkness. A leopard. The warriors reached for their weapons, but Zuberi raised a hand. "Stay still." The leopard watched, ears twitching. It was hungry, but not desperate. Zuberi grabbed a handful of dry leaves, crushed them in her hands, and let the scent spread. The leopard hesitated, sniffed the air, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Hours passed. Their bodies ached, but they didn't stop. Zuberi pushed forward, guiding them through the maze of the forest. Then she stopped. In front of them, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, was the plant they had come for. It grew at the base of an ancient tree, its leaves wide and green, its scent fresh and strong. Relief washed over the group, but they were not safe yet. The journey back awaited them, and the forest was not finished testing them. The moment Zuberi pointed to the base of the ancient tree, the group rushed forward. There it was, the plant she had described, its broad green leaves glistening under the fading sunlight. The air around it carried a strong, fresh scent, unlike anything they had smelled before. It was untouched, growing strong in the deep forest where no one dared to venture. Kamari knelt beside it, staring in disbelief. Could this simple plant really hold the power to save his brother? His hands trembled as he reached for it, but Zuberi stopped him. "Careful," she said softly. "It must be picked the right way." She knelt down, her fingers gently brushing over the leaves. Then, with precise movements, she plucked them one by one, placing them in a woven pouch she had brought. The others watched in silence. For the first time, they saw her not as the girl they had mocked, but as someone who knew more than any of them. With the plant secured, they turned back. The journey home felt just as dangerous. The forest was darker now, the air cooler. Strange sounds echoed around them, and every rustling leaf made them glance over their shoulders. But no one doubted Zuberi anymore. They followed her lead without question. By the time they reached the village, the night had fully settled in. Fires flickered outside the huts, casting shadows on the worried faces of those still awake. The sick were worse now, their bodies weak, their breathing shallow. Kamari ran straight to his home, where his younger brother lay still, barely able to open his eyes. His mother knelt beside the boy, her face streaked with tears. The sight made Kamari's chest tighten. He had never felt this helpless before. Zuberi wasted no time. She handed the leaves to the village healer, who hesitated before taking them. He had doubted her before, just like everyone else. But now, there was no other choice. He crushed the leaves, mixing them with warm water to create a thick paste. The scent filled the air, strong, bitter, but oddly soothing. Carefully he pressed it to the lips of the sick, feeding them small amounts. Then they waited. Hours passed, stretching endlessly. The village was silent, holding its breath. Kamari stayed beside his brother, watching, praying for a miracle. Then, as the first light of dawn touched the village, something happened. The boy stirred, his eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in days, he spoke, a soft, weak whisper. "Brother." Tears filled Kamari's eyes. He wasn't the only one. Throughout the village, the sick began to wake. Their strength returned little by little. Mothers cried, fathers sighed in relief. Children who had been too weak to move now sat up, confused, but alive. The healer looked at Zuberi, his eyes wide with something close to respect. The village had doubted her. They had mocked her, ignored her wisdom, but she had saved them all. Kamari sat frozen, watching his younger brother blink awake. For days, he had been nothing more than a fragile, motionless figure, his breathing shallow, his skin cold. But now, his eyes were open, his lips, once dry and cracked, moved as he whispered, "Brother." That single word hit Kamari harder than any blow he had ever taken. He grabbed his brother's hand, gripping it tightly, as if afraid he would slip away again. His mother let out a choked sob, pressing her forehead against her son's. Relief flooded the small hut, but Kamari couldn't move. His heart pounded as he glanced toward the doorway, where Zuberi stood silently. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something deeper, something he had ignored for years. Shame burned through him. He had spent his life mocking this girl, laughing at her, making sure everyone else did too. He had called her names, made her the target of every cruel joke, and yet, when the village needed help, she had been the only one with the answer. She had walked into the dangerous forest without hesitation, risking everything, while he, Kamari, the strong, the fearless, had done nothing but watch his brother slip away. His fists clenched. He had always thought strength was about being the loudest, the most powerful, the one everyone admired. But Zuberi had shown him what true strength looked like. It wasn't about fearlessness. It was about facing fear and walking through it anyway. It was about holding your head high, even when the world tried to crush you. It was about kindness, wisdom, and patience. A deep ache settled in his chest. He had been so blind. He had spent years trying to break her spirit, but she had never broken. And now, because of her, his brother was alive. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand. The village was gathering outside, murmuring in awe at the miracle they had just witnessed. The once sick villagers were waking up, weak but alive, their families crying in relief. Zuberi's name was on their lips now, not in whispers of mockery, but in admiration. Kamari stepped toward her, his pride screaming at him to turn back, but he ignored it. He had been wrong, he had been cruel, and now he had to face it. When Zuberi's eyes met his, he hesitated, his throat tightening. How could he possibly apologize for years of torment? How could he make up for what he had done? The words felt too small, too insignificant, but he knew he had to say them. He took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm sorry." The village fell silent. The great Kamari, the boy who had never apologized, who had always been the strongest, was now standing before the girl he had tormented, admitting his mistake. Zuberi studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded. She didn't need to say anything. Kamari knew he had a long way to go to make things right, but for the first time in his life, he understood what true respect meant. The village had never been this alive before. Laughter and joy echoed through the air, mixing with the relieved sighs of families reunited with their loved ones. People who had been on the brink of death just days ago were now standing, walking, embracing each other. Mothers wept as they held their children close. Elders clasped their hands in gratitude, and fathers shook their heads in disbelief. The sickness that had threatened to wipe them out was gone, and the one who saved them all stood quietly in the center of it all. Zuberi. She didn't ask for attention, nor did she demand praise, but the villagers couldn't ignore what she had done. They saw her now, not as the strange girl with the big head, not as the subject of cruel jokes, but as the one who had risked her life for them, the one who had held wisdom far beyond her years, the one who had known what no one else did. One by one, people stepped forward. They called her name with pride, no longer in whispers of mockery, but in admiration. They touched her hands, patted her shoulders, and bowed their heads. The elders, who had once dismissed her, now looked at her with deep respect. The children, who had once laughed at her, now gazed up at her in awe. The same village that had turned its back on her now stood before her, grateful, humbled. And then, from the crowd, Kamari emerged. The boy who had tormented her for years, who had led the village in cruel laughter, now walked with heavy steps. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something unfamiliar, something no one had ever seen in him before. Regret, shame, humility. The village fell silent as he stopped in front of her. The great Kamari, the strongest, the most fearless, was now facing the girl he had once ridiculed. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, he did something no one ever thought he would do. He dropped to his knees. "I was wrong," he said, his voice unsteady. "I was cruel. I was a fool." He looked up at her, his usual arrogance nowhere to be seen. "You saved my brother. You saved us all. And I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to say it. I'm sorry." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kamari, the boy who had never apologized, who had always been too proud, too untouchable, was now bowing before the girl he had mocked. Zuberi stared at him for a long moment. She could see the weight of his words, the truth in his eyes. And then, with quiet grace, she extended her hand. Kamari hesitated, then took it. A roar of approval burst from the villagers. They cheered, clapped, and chanted her name. The girl they had once overlooked was now their hero. She had never needed their validation, but now they gave it freely, wholeheartedly. As the sun set over the village, the lesson was clear. Karma had spoken. The one who was mocked had become the one they all depended on. And the boy who had laughed the loudest had learned the hardest lesson of all. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. What do you think? Did Kamari truly learn his lesson? Let us know in the comments. And before you go, check out these other powerful stories on your screen. You won't want to miss them. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.